All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started, and bear with me. I was volunteered and happy to be here. It was such a privilege to have the Clan Conference here in Juneau. I would open by saying my name is Ronalda Kediente Brown. My Tlingit name is atxaayí. I'm from the mountain house of atxaayí out of Angoon. My mother, Irene Agnes Hunter, and my father, Andres Kediente. My father was also adopted into the Tlingit and given the name Taka. The work of the Clan Conference is so important and purely a labor of love. So I'm very appreciative stepping in at a moment's notice and being asked to moderate. Today we have 3 identified topic areas. The first is the Hoonah Tribal House, Anchoring a People in Homeland with Mary Beth Moss and Gordon Greenwald. Just on a personal footnote, my husband, Daryl Brown, spent his latter years of high school in Hoonah and has certainly claimed it with his family as their own. And so we're able and privileged to go to Hoonah on a regular basis. And I have to say that it's such a warm and loving community, which such strong leaders that it's always a pleasure to find ourselves back in Hoonah to visit family. Through those visits, I was able, on a few occasions, to visit the work that you're going to hear about today. That's so beautiful, incredible, and humbling in its thought and the involvement of community, and in its design to reclaim the traditional lands of the Hoonah people. So, with that, I'll begin by turning it over to Gordon and Mary Beth.
Thank you, and welcome. I would like first to introduce myself, Mary Beth Moss. I am a cultural anthropologist with Glacier Bay National Park and Preserve. My Tlingit name is léelk'w. I was honored to be adopted by the Shakee clan in Hoonah. I also have a Ghaatheeni name, léelk'w, and was honored to be given that name by Charles DeWitt. I like to say that I've been working on this project for about 18 years. I started on this project when I was the Chief of Resource Management at Glacier Bay National Park, and then continued working on this dream as a cultural resource specialist and eventually tribal administrator for Hoonah Indian Association. And I'm now back as the project lead with the National Park Service. So I've seen this project from a number of perspectives, but I want to point out that my 18 years compared to the millennium that the Hoonah people have been working on this project is nothing, and I recognize that. I also want to honor the Hoonah elders whose patience and sharing of knowledge has made this project possible. In particular, I want to honor a couple of folks who aren't here with us today. Ken Grant, who is a respected Hoonah elder, of course, a Ghaatheeni spokesperson, and also a National Park Service employee. This has been a dream of his for as long as I've known Ken, and certainly longer than that. I also want to honor Wayne Howell, who is a National Park Service archaeologist who has co-led the charge for this project. I also want to recognize Bob Starbird, who is in the audience. He is the tribal administrator for Hoonah Indian Association and has been very instrumental in seeing this project through to completion. I'm going to be co-presenting with Gordon Greenwald, Kachaz, and I think it's really fitting that we are both speaking today. This has been a collaborative process from its inception. It has been truly, at least in my opinion, and I'll let Hoonah Indian Association and others speak for themselves, but from my humble perspective, it's been a process where we have truly walked hand in hand. We have respected the various areas of expertise that we each bring to the process. We have included each other in all steps of the process, and I think that's in large part, why it is a successful project. So I'm going to begin by giving you a little bit of background. I'm going to run through 14,000 years of geological history in about 5 minutes, and just give you a bit of background on Jerry is.
Can I introduce on Zuba and
Certainly, certainly. Sure. Jerry's going to do some introductions.
I apologize. Thank you very much for allowing me to make a quick introduction. Elvis is in the room. The Tlingit Elvises. These gentlemen are important clan leaders from one from Angoon and one from Sitka, Alan Zuboff and Andy Gamble. I know Alan is listed as part of the panel, and he wanted to make sure that there'd be a wolf/eagle balance, and therefore that's why he asked if Andy Gamble could join him. And I just wanted to say one quick note. I said wolf/eagle because probably around 90 years ago, a wolf was the symbol of the crest symbol for the moiety, and it changed to eagle, but we still like to recognize those of us who are of which I am, of the wolf/eagle moiety, to make mention of that. They're getting ready, and with that in mind, please go ahead. Sorry for the intrusion. Yeah. Alan? She's going to go ahead. Did you want to go after her, or do you have somebody? Yeah. Why don't you give how much longer is your presentation?
We just started.
I mean, how much longer?
30 minutes.
So after yours, then these guys.
Okay, I think we're back on schedule. Little bit of background. The Hoonah Shukaahit will be built in Glacier Bay National Park, and I think everybody is familiar with where Glacier Bay is. It's at the northernmost edge of the Inside Passage. Just north of Juneau. Bartlett Cove is the park's administrative area, the only developed area in the 3.3 million acre park, and that is where the tribal house is slated to be constructed. The Hoonah folks have talked about living in Glacier Bay since time immemorial, and we certainly honor that that concept. We have used Western science to help us hone in a little bit on what we call a Euro-American timeline for when Glacier Bay was likely inhabited first. So we know that about 14,000 years ago, Glacier Bay was a very deep marine fjord. It was lined or edged by a very steep and rocky shoreline, not a particularly habitable location. And then about 5,000 years ago, the main valley glacier began advancing rapidly, moving southward and building an outwash plain in front of it. And you can see that recreation here. That outwash plain likely became inhabitable sometime between the years 1300 and 1400. And we know that from Tlingit place names for the area. We know that from oral history. We also know that from geological research and tree ring data analysis. The area was settled by the people that became the Hoonah clans. Their primary winter village site, Shakee Aan, was a large and very prominent village site in the area. There were two smaller sites, possibly summer fish camps, possibly just smaller villages, Atxaayí and Ghaatheeni, that lined the eastern and western margins. And you can see that the Little Black Glacier, or Sitkituch, was at the head of what was then the bay. Sitkituch, which means Little Black Glacier, gives you an indication that the glacier at that time was viewed as being very small and distant. The fact that it was black is probably an indication that it was not moving. It was, as the ice was melting, the black rocks and soil that the glacier had picked up were evident. And so that name very aptly describes a glacier that is sitting quietly and not moving. We know from oral history that Shakee Aan was a place of peace and abundance. It was a very large winter village site. As I mentioned, it supported probably as many as 8 to 10 clan houses. And again was a place that people reminisce about as being a Garden of Eden, essentially, for the people of Hoonah. Unfortunately, that peace and abundance did not last for long. Sometime in the early 1700s, that main glacial valley glacier, Sitkituch, began advancing again. And we know that sometime just before 1750, that glacier overran the village of Shakee Aan. We know that from Western science, but more importantly, we know that from the Ghaatheeni story of the catastrophic event that unfolded and caused the Hoonah clans to flee from their place of peace and abundance. The story tells us that people fled and went to Excursion Inlet, to léelk'w, and to Hoonah. We also know that the glacier continued to change. It sat at the mouth of Glacier Bay for perhaps 50 years, so that when Vancouver visited the area in 1794, he was met with a wall of ice at the entrance to Glacier Bay. But by 1812, we know that the Hoonah clans had started returning to their remembered landscape of Ghaatheeni, and trees were beginning to grow in the area, and by 1864, there's evidence that those trees were being bark stripped. And again, combining that with the local oral histories, there are elders in Hoonah who talk about their grandparents having returned to Glacier Bay. The village of Ghaatheeni was resettled. It was built again in what is now Bartlett Cove, and the village was centered around a saltery that was developed there, and that area again later became a cannery. So folks from Hoonah were involved in both working with the saltery as well as the cannery. People lived in Ghaatheeni sporadically until the early 1900s, and then eventually left the area probably when the saltery and cannery closed and moved to other cannery locations in the general area in Icy Strait. But of course, folks continued to come back to Glacier Bay, in particular to Bartlett Cove, to hunt and fish and gather resources. The early 1900s became a period of frustration and disenfranchisement. There are a number of things that led to that: the development or establishment of Glacier Bay National Monument, the application of federal laws that were associated with that, entrance into the Western economy, and of course settlement in the village of Hoonah. The Hoonah folks call this period the second Little Ice Age. It's a perfect moniker for a period when people felt alienated and felt that they were not allowed back into their traditional homeland. Tensions built. There was the relationships between the National Park Service and people in Hoonah were strained, to say the very least. Until 1992, when the people of Hoonah staged a peaceful demonstration in Bartlett Cove. It was an event that was meant to restake the Hoonah people's claim not only to their ancestral villages of Lausha, Shakee Aan, and Ghaatheeni, but also to all of Glacier Bay. Sometime shortly thereafter, the Park Service began having open conversations with the Hoonah Indian Association and at that time the Traditional Tribal Council about how we might better bridge the gap between the Park Service and the people of Hoonah, who were the real landowners in Glacier Bay. We saw an opportunity in the 1995-1997 period when the Park Service was engaged in developing a comprehensive plan for Bartlett Cove. We needed to decide what development might occur in that area, and we brought the people of Hoonah over to Homeland, to Glacier Bay, and asked what they would like to see in terms of development or no development in Bartlett Cove. And what we resoundingly heard was that the people of Hoonah wanted to see some physical presence, some physical evidence of their claim to Bartlett Cove and Glacier Bay. And so that is where the idea of a tribal house in Bartlett Cove first made it onto paper. I know it had been dreamed of in many minds in Hoonah long before then, but it first made it onto paper in 1997 in the Bartlett Cove Comprehensive Development Plan. At that time, we just looked very generally at objectives for a tribal house, and those objectives included serving as a focal point for cultural workshops, a place where people from Hoonah could come to perhaps celebrate Kuweeks or hold spirit camps or traditional workshops. We also saw it as a venue for sharing knowledge about the Hoonah lifeways and culture with the thousands of park visitors that pass through Bartlett Cove. And lastly, it could potentially serve as an administrative facility for the National Park Service. Gordon became engaged about that time. This was 1996, I think. Gordon had not yet retired from Hoonah City Schools at that point, and he led the students of Hoonah through a process of developing a scale model of what the tribal house could look like. Wayne Howell was engaged in that process with Gordon at the time, and this model actually has been looked at by the architects who have eventually designed it and used as a touchstone for that architectural process. Unfortunately, as is true for many projects, finding the funding was the most difficult part. The tribal house is estimated to cost about $4 million. We finally obtained those funds in 2011. And began working on very tedious federal planning processes. We just completed the design work for the facility this year. And I want to just touch very quickly on some thoughts that we had about the design. Again, these concepts were developed fully with Hoonah Indian Association and Hoonah Heritage and other entities. First and foremost, we heard from people that they wanted us to maintain a very traditional aesthetic. So we used photographs, old published literature, and then also Gordon and the other carvers working on the project and Park Service architects and landscape designers traveled throughout Southeast Alaska and also into British Columbia to look at other tribal houses so that they could beg, borrow, and steal from places that have gone before us. We also knew, though, that we would need to include some modern amenities. So the facility that was ultimately designed does include electricity, central heating, and restrooms so that it can be used for k'wiks or other modern-day ceremonies. We were asked to include an outdoor gathering area, not only for celebrations, but also to allow for activities in the future like canoe carving, potentially, meal preparation outside. And the facility, we've decided that the facility will be open seasonally to visitors, but the folks from Hoonah will have year-round access to the facility. So, for example, if there's a k'wik in November, the facility will be reopened and brought back up to speed so that it will be available. There have been any number of design challenges. First off, I mentioned that Bartlett Cove is a developed area. It's a very small location. All of the Park Service facilities are located in one very tight spot, so finding a suitable place to put the tribal house was quite difficult. We did end up siting it on a fairly sensitive shoreline, so we were concerned a bit about how we could do that without environmental impacts. The location is also very close to the Glacier Bay Lodge. There is a steep slope that backs the beach front there, so it was very difficult to figure out how to site this large building on a steep slope. And then there are a number of historic districts and other issues that we had to consider, including the fact that the area is covered with culturally modified trees that Hoonah Indian Association was concerned about. And Bartlett Cove itself is a traditional cultural property, and so we wanted to make sure that anything that we did in terms of development would not compromise its eligibility as a traditional cultural property. Unfortunately, we also had a number of federal code issues that were difficult to work through, and Gordon can share more about those with you. For example, federal facilities have to be accessible, fully accessible, and so Gordon and the architects had to work through the challenge of how to make an oval entrance accessible to wheelchairs, and they actually came up with a very unique way of hinging the bottom of that oval so that it can be unhinged, and wheelchairs can actually go through that oval opening so that everybody will have that experience of moving through this oval entrance. We had a number of safety issues. We were very concerned that the inside look as traditional as possible, but what we discovered is that when we designed this central fire pit, federal code requires that you have handrails if you're going to be stepping down any distance, and so the architects again worked with us and with the tribe to design handrails that can collapse and will not be visible, as well as an ADA wheelchair ramp that will allow elders to get down into the central fire pit. And speaking of the fire pit, we cannot have actually open fires in a federal building, and so we are still having conversations about how can we accommodate this very important tradition of having open flames, or something that at least symbolizes those open flames in this building, and that conversation is actually ongoing. We did see some pretty funky looking fake logs that were first rolled by us that we didn't approve of, but so we're still continuing those discussions. And then the building is also must meet sustainability code. So we've looked at things like energy efficiency and those types of things. We think that the design that the architects have ended up with meets all the needs and the challenges of both the Park Service and Hoonah Indian Association. construction. As I said, the design was just complete this October. We just signed off on construction documents. The contract will be going out for bid this winter, so we're hoping that we will get lots of bids this winter. Construction will begin this spring, and we are hoping for an opening of the facility in the late spring or early summer of 2016. So that gives us about a year and a half to construct the facility. In the meantime, we have charged forth with developing the cultural elements for the tribal house. It's been an important way of keeping Hoonah Indian Association engaged and active in the process, an important way of sharing funding with the community and providing for employment. Importantly, we also wanted to find ways to pass on these important traditions, form line design, carving, and weaving to another generation. And quite frankly, we also wanted to keep the folks in Hoonah aware that while this federal process was long and tedious, we were moving forward and we were committed to completing. So we have cooperatively developed with Hoonah Indian Association an internal house screen for the facility, 4 house posts, and Gordon and his crew are just now working on the house front. The tribe will also be hopefully contracting with the Park Service to hand adds all of the internal and external planking for the facility, as well as the flooring. And then in the future, we hope to be able to transfer funds to develop totem poles and then utilitarian items for inside the tribal house. With that, I'm going to have Gordon share more about the Cultural Elements program.
Goodness, Chief. Kachias, Chukanadi, Dukdaintan, Yeti, Cattle, Hit. Hoonah is my home. I grew up there, went back and taught, and then was offered the opportunity to take the lead on this project. And so who can turn down an opportunity to represent our people in our homeland? So I jumped into this just about 3 years ago. At the time, I hired, or atxaayí, Hoonah Indian Association, hired Owen James and Herb Shakee Sr. as my assistants, and I had Louis White Jr. as an apprentice. And we started off with the house screen. The house screen, turns out to be 16 feet high, 30 feet wide. And so when I started off on this, I asked the park, how big should it be? And they said, we don't know how big the building is. Don't worry, we'll make the building fit around it. So I said, okay, I can do that. And then I said, what do you want on the screen? And they said, Hoonah history. So now I'm off and running. And so that was where my marching orders to go forward. So going in here, this is a top view of the house. If you took the roof off of it, showing you this is where the screen would be. So the entrance is up in this end, facing north. And the screen, as you walk in, would look at, you'll be looking at the screen. Now notice we're calling it a tribal house. Traditionally it would be a clan house, but they're only building one, and we needed to represent the 4 original Hoonah clans. So this is why we somewhat changed the name to a tribal house versus a clan house. The 4 house posts, 1 for each of the 4 clans. Again, non-traditional, we understand that, but we're trying to do the best we can to represent our people in our homelands. The very beginning, we didn't show in this slide, but when we had the timbers, we had obviously a ceremony of blessing with the logs. The elders came out and we did this. This was the first log that we started with to cut the panel, the boards for the panel. And you can see the first board that I was measuring as it came off. We also then started working on our tools. We started making our own hand tools like we should. We wanted to use their traditional styles of tools, and that was the beginning of our process. This is a rough draft of what the interior panel was or is. I had many visits from ancestors through the nights as I was going along, so there were many additions and deletions from this as I went along, and I always joked with my assistants that every now and then they would knock on my door in the middle of the night and say, "Young man, you thought you knew what you were doing. No, you don't. You need to change this." So we changed as often as we needed to, and my assistants always looked in the morning when I walked in. If I had an eraser in my hand, that meant there were changes to be had. And they would go, "Did you have a visit last night?" I said, "Yes, we had one. We're going to change now." So the process that we would do, like traditional work, is we paint the form lines and then did the fine carving around it. So that was the process we were going through there. You can see some of the planks that we were working on as the whole process was going through. Throughout this process, consultation with elders was a must. I could not go forward on my own. I had to have the guidance of my elders to help me get to where they felt I needed to get. So these are just a few of them that had stopped in. They're always welcome. Any person is welcome to come in and see what we're doing. This is not about us as individuals, it's about us as people. And so it's yours, and you're welcome to come in anytime we're there. I also welcomed younger carvers from the school system, or those that were of school age that wanted to come in on their own. We still have some that are coming in on their own, even during the summer. And so I offered credit to high school students if they came in during the school day. If they came in otherwise, they just got our time as much as they needed. Our job is to pass on and not to keep amongst ourselves what we do know. So we have them coming in all the time. We also have community members stopping in and working on things now. We also had my assistants, you can see they learned how to make cedar bark rope, because that was part of the project that we wanted. We could have gone to the store to buy the ropes that we needed but it was not the same. So we had to do the cedar bark rope. So they learned that though traditionally that may have been a woman's job, they were not going to try to take the work away from the women. They figured this was all they wanted to do for rope. They did their share, and that's enough. They respected the woman's work nowadays. So Herb and Owen are in the audience, by the way, so I'm not talking behind their back. Also in this project is the passing on of the knowledge of weaving, the spruce root weaving, the Tlingit baskets and other styles. And so it's not just carving and making a tribal house, but we do also have a group that in Hoonah that are doing the traditional spruce root basket weaving, and these are some of them that are working on it. I believe there were five women that were certified by Sea Alaska as Tlingit spruce root weavers, and then they took on, each one of them took on one or two apprentices. So each weaver took on 2 apprentices, and they're continuing to work with them on passing on this knowledge. This is the screen. There's a little bit that was not completed at this time, so I'll take just a few minutes here just to briefly explain to you what you're seeing here is for the 4 clans, the Ghaatheeni is over here is Léelk'w Bay. So this screen, again, until dedicated and my elders decide what they want to name this screen, we do not have a name for it. The 3 of us that are carving it, we call it the footprints of our ancestors, but that's just our communication with each other as to what it is. So the 4 clans, the Ghaatheeni, were the homeland of Léelk'w Bay, and the glacier at the head of Léelk'w Bay represented are the tsunamis that they suffered through generations of time. And so this is the Ghaatheeni homeland. You cannot see very well. Above that is a canoe. It now has the crests of the Hoonah Tlingit on it, but the canoe has cedar bark rope, and it's representing the fact that the Ghaatheeni canoe is still anchored in their homeland of Léelk'w Bay. Though we live in Hoonah, their home is still Léelk'w Bay. And then Mount Fairweather, obviously an important mountain to all of the Ghaatheeni as well as all of the Hoonah people. On it are a series of 9 icebergs, icy straits drifting around out there, but not just icebergs, they're also our ancestors. And all of those, if you can see them in more detail, you'd realize that all 9 of those icebergs or our ancestors are carved slightly differently, because no 2 are the same, yet they are all the same. All our ancestors are our ancestors. They all are just a little bit different. This large face in the middle is the glacier that came down through Glacier Bay that forced us out of Glacier Bay. It's hard to see here, but this is a Ghaatheeni. You'll see the glacier reflecting in her eyes as it was coming forward. We'll eventually have a doorway cut in here in the middle. Over here is the Kagwantan and the cliff in Ghaatheeni, Grouse Fort. That was their homeland after they had to evacuate Glacier Bay. The Kagwantan canoe and a cedar bark rope and an anchor, and their canoe is still anchored in Ghaatheeni. The Chukanady canoe I didn't mention was over here on this side. And all of these canoes have crests on them now, but the Chukanady canoe has an anchor, and it's still anchored in Glacier Bay. On this one over here, Wishkitan and Excursion Inlet, and you can't see, but there's a log palisade for a fort when they had their fort in Ghaatheeni in Excursion. And the Wishkitan canoe with the shark, they were the first ones that came up with the crests that they wanted on their canoe, and their canoe is still anchored in their home of Ghaatheeni or Excursion Inlet. You can't see very well up here a set of mountains that are behind Bear Track in Glacier Bay, and on it I have some marbled merlets, cheat, and I wanted to honor them in the woods up in the trees with us when we lived in the mountains. In the middle, there's a canoe, and again, you cannot see it very well in this picture, but there's a canoe with people in it, with no crests and no designs. Now, we have many other people living in Hoonah, many other clans and other non-native people as well, and they're all in the homelands with us now. They came as friends, and in this picture, you'll see, if you could see it, all of them have their canoe, or in the canoe, they all have their paddles raised as our friends, though they're in our homelands. So this is the basic idea. Obviously, a very shortened version of all of that history that's behind every one of those figures. So this is the interior panel that's 16 feet high and 30 feet wide. Once that phase of the project was completed, then we moved on to the house posts. And there was just the three of us. So you can see the beginnings of the house posts as we moved them into the shop to work on them. They're 11 feet 6 inches high. Even some of the community members were there often working with us. They volunteered just to be a part of the project. And I don't know why the photographer often caught me standing around talking. I don't know if that was normal or not, but anyway. The Duckdainton house post, and again, nothing was done without the elders' consultation. What was intended, what the oral history was that they wanted depicted, they controlled. Of each of the clans, they controlled what was on them. It was not my idea. With consultation, all of the clans told a lot of the oral history, and as I heard this morning, there were many times they would say, no, you cannot record what we're going to tell you, because you cannot carve it if you do not know it. Though it was not mine to know, it was mine to know for this project, but not mine to tell. The Wushkitan house post was the second one we worked on. Again, this is just a couple more pictures of the Wushkitan. And the Chukanady house post. Kagwantan house post. There's a picture of all four of them completed. So you can see what's there. And again, since since I have been told some of the history behind them, I know some of that, but it's not mine to tell you. I'm sorry, I can't tell you those. But you can refer to the correct clan member if they wanted to let you know what you're looking at. So now we're preparing more of the house planks for the front of the house, the front screen. And I'm working on a draft. We have the draft design of what the house screen will look like, and it's 18 feet high and 45 feet wide. So now we hand-adzed all of the planks. The three of us have hand-adzed all of the planks for this, and we're developing the patterns. You can see the pattern was done on visqueen, and then we would apply it to the boards. So what we would do on the visqueen is, once we drew the design on, we would cut little dashes out periodically along the lines. Then we could put the visqueen down on top of the boards, mark the boards, and then all I had to do is draw dot to dot. And so that's the process that we would work with. So these are the partners in this project to this point, and I want to thank every one of them. It's been a great honor for me. The elders have shared generously. Just as I heard this morning, they did not criticize some of my mistakes. They would come in and gently nudge me from one side to the other to make the changes that needed to be made. And they would walk out, letting me still stand with pride, saying, hey, goodness sheesh, I'm glad you taught me to move that direction, and didn't leave me embarrassed. So again, jokingly, I often would say they gave me all the rope I needed and the post to hang from, and I'm still alive. So if you want to follow any of what's going on, you can see the Facebook page. The park has a Facebook address there. and it's updated periodically with our work so that we continue to add to what we're doing. Okay, so I don't know if we have time for questions and answers or on this, or okay. So I guess we'll need to move on. So Ganesh Chish, thank you very much.